Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. I'm State Senator Pat Flowers, I represent a portion of Gallatin County and also serve as the Democratic leader in the state Senate. I'm very happy to have with me today Senator Shannon O'Brien, who's also running for Superintendent of Public Instruction. As you all know, the election and the 2025 legislative session are on the horizon. Ballots are out, and so people are already voting. And I thought it was a timely point for us to talk about what we see coming for our priorities in the coming legislature. We have some concrete and specific proposals that we're working on. Our caucus has been working over the last 2 years to develop those. Shortly after the election, we'll probably give you more specifics in terms of specific legislation that's being drafted. And we'll touch on some of that today, but probably not in as much detail as we will here in another month. As Montana Democrats, our bottom line is we believe that state government should be serving the people of Montana. That's our most important job. And we're here today. We're going to be here in January to make sure that this legislature is putting Montanans first. And as we evaluate every piece of legislation, we're going to be looking at it to ensure that that in fact is happening. So if we're opposed to something, it's because we don't believe that it is serving Montanans, and the opposite is also true. I think based on all of our conversations we've had on the doors and kind of with our friends and family and that sort of thing, I think what Montanans are looking for right now is just a fair shake. And that's not happening in every case. As you know, a lot of us are struggling just to be able to afford to live here. And we need to make some changes in order to address that directly. The other concern that came up in the last session, and we think may also come up as a concern in the coming session, is just an attack on our freedoms. Montanans hold their 1972 Constitution with great reverence. We've been able to eliminate or address the challenges to that in the last session, and we intend to do that again if they come up. Under Governor Gianforte, I think we all know and have read about it, heard about it over the last couple years. Our property taxes have skyrocketed. The housing situation was recently rated the worst in the country for affordability. That's number one, worst, by the National Realtors Association. Montana's freedoms under regarding reproductive rights and even our opportunity to vote has been under attack. Thousands of working Montanans lost their health care, which affected, of course, their families, but it also affected some of our small businesses that they work for. And our public education system, which is really the foundation for our kids to be able to develop and have productive and fruitful lives themselves, has been under attack. It was under attack in the last session. We expect more of the same in the coming session, and we're greatly concerned about it, and I know Senator O'Brien's going to talk about that. So we're focused on building a better future for families in Montana and making life in general more affordable, kind of those kitchen table issues we think are most important. And that future includes a fairer tax structure, and that would be not more breaks for large corporations or for wealthy Montanans, but for working Montanans, low and middle income Montanans. We see a future that has affordable housing, so our kids that grow up here can afford to stay here and can find a home within their means. And we see a future where we have a strong public education system. When I moved here many decades ago in the 70s, Montana's education system was really one of the, public education system was one of the envies of the country, and it should remain that. And that's not only good for our kids, but it's good for business because it's attractive to businesses to move to a place where they know their kids are going to be well educated. And lastly, we see a future that protects our rights and freedoms. Our Constitution is something that we want to make sure is not diminished in any way, and the rights and opportunities and freedoms that come with that are preserved. A few topics now in a little more depth. And that is, we'll start with a property tax. As I said, we've got a property tax crisis on our hands. This crisis is entirely of Governor Gianforte's making and the Republican majority in the legislature. Despite repeated warnings about the property tax disaster facing Montana families for more than a year, they really did nothing to address that. Democrats offered relief in the last session from that, and even those modest efforts were rebuffed by the Republican majority. Over a year ago, we proposed a special session to the governor to reduce tax rates and eliminate the property tax increase. Not only did he not take us up on our offer or our proposal, he never even responded, zero, nothing, in response to that request. In the meantime, my tax bill went through the roof, and any of you that own a home, I'm sure, experienced the same thing. What's worse is they deepen the problem by giving tax breaks to major corporations. As a result, the rest of us, including Main Street businesses, have seen our property taxes go up while large corporations went down, the taxes went down. The governor and the Republican majority started with a $2 billion surplus in the last session, and we could have used that to reduce the burden on Montana's families, and we didn't do that. And so that $2 billion surplus is largely gone, and we still end up with a massive tax hike and property tax. And in our minds, that was just an opportunity missed, and we've failed the Montana public. Our tax plan, our property tax plan, we shared in detail with you a couple of months ago. It's largely the same now. We believe we restore some fairness and put more money back in Montanans' pockets, providing long-term tax relief by cutting property taxes for low and middle-income Montanans and protect working folks and retirees from future tax hikes. Our goal is to fix the problem and put the focus where it should be on Montana families and small businesses. To accomplish our goal, we proposed a $50,000 homestead exemption for primary homes of Montana residents and a $200,000 exemption for small businesses. This step will immediately lower taxes for homeowners, renters, and Main Street businesses. Our plan would create a new, fair, tiered residential property tax rate that cuts taxes for low and middle-income Montanans while making sure that the owners of the higher valued properties pay their fair share. Lastly, our plan would establish a housing fairness tax credit for working families and retired Montanans, especially those living on a fixed income. That credit will help ensure Montanans aren't priced out of their homes by providing a tax credit to offset any property tax increases that become, especially for those on a fixed income, quickly become unaffordable. These bills will be ready on day one. They're already in drafting at this point. Next, I want to turn to Medicaid. As you all know, Montana broadened the application of Medicaid in 2015, as some 40 other states have done. Since then, this bipartisan policy has been a resounding success. It helps working Montana stay healthy, benefits the small businesses that employ them, and it's an essential part of our state's rural health care system. As a result, Montana's uninsured rate is down by more than 50%, while ER visits and hospitalizations have also dropped, cutting our healthcare expenses, which we all ultimately indirectly pay for one way or the other. It goes without saying, but continuing the Medicaid that's been in place for the last decade is going to be incredibly important and is really a top priority for our Democratic caucus and certainly for some of our colleagues across the aisle too. We also believe we can improve Medicaid. We can make it easier for Montanans who need to be on the program to enroll and maintain their coverage, and make sure that as they're on that, they're ready to transition off onto private insurance when they have that ability. Helping Montanans stay healthy, we all know is good for workers, families, and our businesses. The Medicaid program has been a great success, and common sense demands that we continue to keep that program in place, and we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. With that, I want to turn it over to Senator O'Brien to talk a bit about housing affordability and public education. Senator O'Brien.
Thank you, Senator Flowers, and thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. The legislative session will be with us before we know it, and so it's great to discuss some of the top issues that Democrats will be dealing with. I will be talking to you a bit now about education, part of our government that is very close to my heart, as well as housing, which is having a high impact on all Montana families. I also want to step back and share that the Montana Democrats have had a legislative listening tour that has taken place throughout the interim. We have been able to meet with 30 communities throughout the state, small groups, large groups, to listen to the concerns and issues about the barriers that are taking place for them and how we can be helpful. So much of what you'll be hearing and seeing throughout the legislative session will be in response to our own districts and what we've seen there, but also certainly part of those legislative tours that have taken place throughout the interim. Education is the backbone and the heart and soul of our communities throughout Montana. And at this point in time, we have a major teacher shortage crisis. Over 2,000 teachers left their jobs last June. And 1,300 of those people left the profession altogether. And the one that really breaks my heart is that 1/3 of all first-year teachers left the profession after just 1 year. I've spoken with a friend who has a son who went into education following in his father's footsteps. And he taught for this young man, this son, taught for 3 years and realized that he was not able to support his family, housing, food, clothes. And so after 3 years of teaching, he chose to change professions. He's now driving a milk truck, making $60,000 a year so that he can support his family. We have to prioritize our education. We have to prioritize public schools and do the right thing. Every child deserves a safe school and a quality teacher in the classroom. This is somewhat personal for me. We have a high school, my husband and I have a high school boy, sophomore. First week of class, we had a lockdown at his school. We have to address safe schools, and we have to make sure that the teacher shortage crisis is addressed. Teacher salaries are a big piece of that, so you'll be expecting legislation coming from Democrats on increasing teacher salaries. Benefits is something that has been addressed that needs to be continued to address, but there's also a big piece of the puzzle, and that is housing. Teachers cannot afford to live in the communities in which they teach because they can't afford the housing. And this is a problem not only for teachers, but for all Montana working people. So together with people throughout the state, we are coming up with solutions to this problem that will address both relief for renters and for homeowners and opportunities for people to get into home buying and afford to stay in their homes. I had a woman in tears just after the legislative session, scared about her property taxes. And then she called me again after she got her property tax bill, and she was looking at having to leave her home. She was retired, and she was looking at having to sell her home because they couldn't afford to stay there. So it's not okay for Montanans to have to leave their home because they can't afford to stay in them. Thank you all so much for being here and for prioritizing this work that we are all doing, and we'll stand for questions.
Eric?
Teacher pay, there's a proposal circulating from some of the Republicans to talk about that stuff. We put some money into that system through the Teach Act framework. How do you feel about that? Does that look like a good work at this point?
I'm very curious about that. So the question was about the Teach Act and proposing more investment in the Teach Act. The Teach Act while it was very well intended, it certainly didn't hit the mark for most of the school districts, for many of the school districts, because it had a base pay that school districts had to meet in order to qualify for supplemental funding. And many of the school districts simply could not increase pay. And when we're talking about school districts that might only have 2 or 3 or 5 teachers, their budget is very, very tight. And those are the districts that we're seeing the lowest pay. I saw data that from School Board Association that shared some of the lowest school district pay from last fall. And some of those starting salaries were right at $31,000 a year for the base pay. I will be very curious to see. I know that there are many Republicans who are talking about increasing that quality teacher payment, and that way districts are required to use that money to go toward salaries, which would be very helpful.
One thing that kind of goes hand in hand with everything that you guys have talked about today is childcare and childcare costs. And watching the interim committees, it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of solid proposals that have been coming up so far. Maybe there has been in the past month or so, but I'm not sure. What's your guys' plan there? How does that coincide with everything here between affordability, teachers, and healthcare?
Well, the biggest stride, good question. Childcare is a huge issue. I've got my first grandson on the way, which I'm super excited about, and I'm also finding out about how challenging it is to find childcare. My daughter can't find childcare yet, and so it's clearly an issue in Gallatin County, and I think it's across the entire state. We've got a real child care resources desert in this state. The biggest change we made in the last session was to increase the eligibility limit on the Best Beginnings and put more money into that. I expect we're going to be looking at that again. I've heard some other ideas on the horizon for also trying to make childcare more available and not only expand availability but make it more affordable, but I don't have all the details on those worked out. Jonathan?
Yes, I was just wondering, the governor's housing or property tax task force, they came out with a homestead exemption recommendation as well. Is it similar to what you guys have proposed, or are there differences in structure?
I think it's both similar and different, and we'll be looking at his proposal or his commission's proposal, and we feel very good about what we've put together. We're clear that it does benefit lower-income Montanans, middle-income Montanans, and we're open to making changes that maybe we can dovetail with the governor's proposal. The bottom line is it doesn't really matter to us whose proposal it is as long as it serves Montanans and puts Montanans first and ensures that lower-income and middle-income Montanans are going to be able to stay in their homes and afford to buy homes. Victoria?
If the majority rule initiative passes, has the caucus discussed at all what you would like to see the legislature pass on that?
Good question, Victoria. So you're referring to the I-126,
Yeah.
I-127?
126 or 127.
Yeah. Yep. And we have not gone into a lot of discussion within our caucus on what that would look like. If they both pass, certainly that'll be an important discussion that this legislature is going to have to embark on. And I think there are a few options that we can explore, and whether it's runoff elections or something else to meet that requirement. And that'll be up to Montanans, and I'm sure legislators on both sides of the aisle will work together to find a way to meet the intent of those initiatives. Here.
On housing, there's some more ideas in circulation from the latest round of the governor's housing task force. Anything there that you're particularly excited about? Parking, there's some stuff about protecting financial incentives for affordable housing. Anything there that the caucus is likely to see about?
We are, I know, focused again on hopefully supporting the multifamily housing trust that we passed in the last session. It was part of House Bill, I think it was 819. So that's important. I've heard discussions of a low-income housing tax credit, and certainly we've heard from developers that could be a real benefit to those developers to be able to produce low-income housing. And so those are a couple of things we're looking at. Eric?
So you're not interested in tackling parking minimums?
Parking, I'm sorry.
Is there any, one of the proposals would be to tell cities that can't require minimum parking requirements for new construction, make it cheaper and easier to get. Is that something the caucus is interested in as well?
Well, in the words of Senator O'Brien, we're curious what that looks like. I think we've seen that in Gallatin County, and it's very controversial in Gallatin County, and I think it will be in other places also. Our general orientation as Democrats is not to tell local governments how to do their job, and we kind of stand by that. There have been some exceptions to that, but we want to avoid taking away solutions from local government and how they manage really all the issues that are on their table. And so we'll be pretty suspect of more legislative limitations on local government autonomy and decision making. Jonathan?
obviously, last session, the Democratic caucus was dealing with a Republican supermajority and things of that nature. What do you think is realistic to hope for or to expect for this coming session for the type of ability you may have to influence perhaps more than last session?
Thanks, Jonathan, for the question. I think realistically, we believe we'll pick up a few seats in both the House and the Senate. And if you pick up 2 more seats in the Senate or 3 more seats in the Senate on some of these key issues on which we may be divided with Republicans, it makes it that much easier to get those passed. So, certainly would be an advantage if we can pick up a few seats in both the House and the Senate, and that is what we expect. We're running great candidates this year. They're working really hard and being well received in their communities, so we believe we will pick up some seats.
Sort of in that regard, regardless of how the election goes and what the split is, you guys are going to have to work together if you want to pass Medicaid expansion again, property tax stuff. What's the conversations been like in the past few months or just throughout the interim with Republicans in terms of that lobbying effort to try to get that conversation going before the session starts?
We work, obviously, during the interim in all the interim committees, and so that conversation on some of these key issues has been ongoing there. And then also on something like reauthorizing Medicaid, there are lots of conversations going on between Democrats and Republicans about how to make that happen. And so I think you can rest assured on some of these key issues that truly are bipartisan and are good for Montana. We're talking and trying to figure out solutions that both Republicans and Democrats can support. Do you want to talk about education in any way in that regard?
I think, what you've seen in the interim committee and the constitutional players group has been focused on priorities and sharing identification of the problems and coming up with solutions together. That said, in the past, we just haven't seen enough in the solutions for education in particular. And so our hope is to support education, prioritize education, and the other issues that are important. I think that's all.
You mentioned redetermination briefly, Senator. I am curious how you think that whole process of the over 100,000 rules in the healthcare will influence the negotiations on maintaining expansion.
It's a good question. I'm not sure how they'll influence that negotiation. It's our opinion that process was not well done, that there were ways to retain more folks with coverage. As we went through that process, there were ways to soften the blow to those families that were affected by that redetermination, and we didn't take advantage of those opportunities. We thought it was kind of a blunt instrument sort of approach that we don't think was necessary or helpful. It's hard to say how that's going to influence negotiations. As I said, I think there are lots of Republicans and obviously lots of Democrats who understand how important our current program, Medicaid, has been for Montana, both in rural health care and just in the lives of families that have gotten health insurance and health care out of that, and they understand that. And I think in the end, that's what's going to drive that negotiation, is our collective recognition that we need to keep this in place in order to keep Montana families healthy.
Obviously, we've hit on kind of some of the higher end topics that are, I'm sure, going to be a big focus of next session. But is there anything that you guys have your eyes on that we haven't talked about or that hasn't maybe been a big deal yet during the interim? I mean, I know there's been a lot about prison capacity still, any number of things, but is there anything else you guys are thinking about now that is a big priority for you guys?
That's a great question. Something that has been touched on in this conversation is that balance of local control. And, you know, I think it's the role of the state to provide, in many ways, the role of the state to provide for local communities to serve their constituents. And whether it be housing or whether it be education, we need to provide those communities opportunities to serve Montanans and get out of the way and allow them to do that. I think many times the legislature wants to come up with very specific rules in bills that that control our communities, and we need to get out of the way and allow school districts and school boards to make their decisions and be responsive to the local needs, and local governments to do the same to serve those needs.
Are you talking about, excuse me, you're talking about the housing, homestead, different ideas there. When you're thinking of shifting the tax burden, who can expect to maybe assume some of that tax burden, and what direction is that going to go if you do kind of provide those homestead and the business exemption?
I'll just put one point, and then be happy if you want to follow up. We're seeing more and more new Montanans, people moving to the state with high salaries. And so our revenue from income tax is increasing. And you can talk to the Department of Revenue about some of those statistics, but that is a fairly reliable source of income.
The other thing I would add is, as we hopefully fix the tax rate on residential homeowners or taxpayers, if those come down, it's kind of a zero-sum gain. So the or the property tax paid by large corporations will go up to balance that out. And that's what we've seen as one of the problems with the last go-around, is there were exemptions on the business end that prevented the same level of increase in valuation and resulting tax burden. And so as the residential tax burden went up, the large business corporation taxes went down, and we need to re-level that, in our opinion. Any other questions? Thank you again for being here. I know it's an incredibly busy time, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your week to spend a half hour with us here. And look forward to working with you all in the session. We'll probably see you all in another 3 or 4 weeks. Thanks again.